We're talking about loosely what I'm calling the American Friends of Hamas. You can call in 508-928-5255. We are taking calls 508-928-5255. And we're also live on Rockfin. I finally figured out how to do Rockfin. The next hurdle is going to be Odyssey. That's even more strange, but I'll figure it out. So, Mike, obviously, last Saturday, the last day of a cycle of Jewish high holidays, that being Simchas Torah, Hamas invaded Israel. They attacked a rock concert or a rock festival near Gaza, slaughtering about 200 people. Right. They say it could be up to 300. Coming in on gliders. Israel was completely unprepared, completely flat-footed, which is interesting. They also did what, in a sense, radical Islamists have done for almost a century, which is that they went into villages and they just murdered everyone that they could get their hands on. I want to talk about what that's about because I think it's a religious issue. But before we go there, I want to talk about the American Friends of Hamas. But I want you to, if you don't mind, I'd like you to weigh in a bit on all of these events.
Right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I thought you were going to give a monologue there. Okay. Well, it only came as a surprise to people like John Greenblatt, who seemed to be so shocked that there were all these pro-Hamas people in, I guess, Congress, in academia, in the Democrat Party, as if he didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
There is a very deep-seated anti-Israel, anti-Semitism, largely resonant, by the way, on the left. It always has been, going back to at least FDR and his miserable wife. And yet, some of the problem is that Jews being, I guess, genetically having to be Democrat, never wanted to acknowledge it. One of the questions I asked in my current article that just went up, how many Jews are going to be red-pilled by what's happened?
Probably those who won't be or haven't been by now are lost. They're beyond the pale. Now, having said that, I will note that in events like this, Jews of all stripes generally come together. It's kind of natural to do that when you're under attack. You know, people kind of close ranks and they don't like each other. They don't agree with each other. But in the interest of survival, they tend to close ranks, except, of course, the far extreme sides of the equation, both on the left and on the right, who, just remain, oblivious. It's almost like they live in their own world. But, I think that many liberals are going to put aside those qualms temporarily, but in the interregnum, but then in the aftermath, they'll just go back to their old ways. And
I think you're exactly right.
Yeah.
There will be some who will be red-pilled. There won't be that many. I didn't add in my article the qualification that you made that, when you're in the heat of battle, then everyone's going to get together in a foxhole for that period of time. But it's the whole thing is truly disappointing, but you're never going to get people to change. People never change. And the tangent that I went on, that I didn't really go off too much on, was that you would have thought that in the aftermath of World War II, when it became obvious to anyone who had an IQ over 70, that the way that we handled everything after Yalta was, let's be kind, not very good. But the political affiliations really didn't change. If anything, they attacked the messenger, so to speak, and how they went after Joe McCarthy. So unfortunately, people don't change. And as I said at the time, and I was hated for this by some people, after 9/11, I was asked the same question: are people going to, although the term red pill didn't really exist then, are people going to change? I said no. You'd have to have a 9/11 every day for 10 years, and it might have an effect.
Well, there's always a handful that do, and but the bottom line is that they're involved in a cult, they're involved in a religion. They get reinforcements from, I would argue, the establishment, the Eastern Seaboard liberal, what used to be called the Eastern Seaboard liberal establishment, which views these people as a useful tool and which tends to inflame and enhance their position, their mindless position. And they will continue to go on. These are the same people who supported Stalin, the same people who were part of the anti-Vietnam War movement, which, by the way, was a legitimate movement, but they would co-opt it and corrupt it with an agenda and a motive that really was not in America's interest. We could even go back to the Hitler-Stalin period when they were pro-Hitler. Of course, that did peel off a couple of them, I will say that, when Hitler and Stalin came out and launched jointly World War II. But, the course continued along. They continued to maintain the Hitler-Stalin agenda. And then, of course, when Hitler double-crossed Stalin, they went back to just Stalin. But but even before that, they were all for either Stalin or Trotsky, which are kind of two birds of a feather, just an inter-communist struggle.
Well, and that in the guise of Marxism, which is always about an oppressor and those oppressed, that Stalin became the victim, and therefore was a better client of Marxism, so then they supported Stalin. Of course, why did we support Stalin? That's a whole other.
Well, that's another question, but there were a lot of them that basically wormed their way into the government. We know this from many, many witnesses and many people who actually did see the light, starting with Whittaker Chambers, but a lot of others as well. And, there were enough people to expose this after World War II that we know what happened, but they remained there and they're still there. Their ancestors, this government never really purged that radical anti-American agenda because there is a general sympathy to it and support for it amongst what Michael J. Glennon calls the double government, what other people have other names for it. It is the Anglo-American establishment actually is a good one. That comes from Professor Carroll Quigley of Georgetown University. He was a mentor to Bill Clinton, and he was the author of the book Tragedy and Hope. But, they're tools of this establishment, and they basically work in their interests, and they have a sense that they are, and that they'll be rewarded for it. So they remain loyal to it. They're anti-religion, they're anti-God, they're anti-Christian, they're anti-Jewish, they're anti-American. They're anti any institution that promotes the individual under God. They want to create this, they crave power, they crave acceptance, they crave social mobility, they crave money, and all of those things are a part of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for them, so to speak.
Well, one of the references I make in the article is to one of the architects of this disastrous policy, Jake Sullivan.
Okay.
And he's been rolling a bit, and things are enumerated. Just a terrible job this guy's done with this pro-Iran policy going back, I think, to the Obama administration.
Oh, yeah.
So, interestingly enough, the guy is praised for his work ethic. The fact that everything he did was wrong and horrible doesn't matter. He works hard. Indeed, there was an article that I found that praised him for being able to stave off a home break-in that occurred at 3 a.m. because he was up working at 3 a.m.
So that's how they're going to promote him. I mean, I think Stalin was up probably working a lot too, but
Yeah.
that's like, that's a good one. Yeah, working
Yeah, well,
hard.
I mean,
So,
it goes back to the previous article, addicted to the process, right? Well, it doesn't matter what he did; he was working hard.
yeah,
And
it's like they talk about people how smart they are, how brilliant they
yes,
are. They don't talk about what they're being smart about.
yes,
I mean, I think Trotsky was brilliant, but he was also very warped. It
yeah.
doesn't. They're not talking about the actual values being promoted. So here we have basically this attack on Israel by Hamas, and I understand there's broader geopolitical questions going on, but the fact is that this is the sort of thing that you would think conventionally everyone would condemn. Were they attacking a military target? No, they were grabbing babies and chopping their heads off and doing the stuff that unfortunately and sadly the Israelis have gotten used to, going way back, this
Right.
kind of barbarism. And you got people like this Harvard group that sends out a memo signing a memo saying we hold Israel solely responsible for these events. And it was one of the guys in that group. I've included his picture in the snapshot for the show. Josh Wilcox. He's the heir of a perfume fortune in England. His mother sold her company to, I think, Estee Lauder for something like $3 billion. I mean, this is a guy who's not going to have to deal with the consequences of his insanity. He's obviously the ultimate poster boy for this kind of privilege. But there are some other Harvard groups that are now scrambling because Ackerman, who's the head of a hedge fund, has asked for the names of the people in the groups that signed this pledge condemning Israel after they had this slaughter of 1,000 Jews. And the idea being that these people, these Harvard people, will pay a consequence in that they're not going to get to work for Goldman Sachs, when they graduate. So now they're backing away. Now they're saying they're taking their name off. And the new chancellor of Harvard, I think she drafted 3 public letters before she finally got to condemn the Hamas attack. And it just, it kind of begs the question of why this would happen. Now, I understand that Palestinian groups, even though I totally disagree with their position, I get the fact that they've got skin in the game. They want the Palestinian Arab nationalists who want to replace Israel with a Palestinian Arab national state. I don't agree with that at all. But they have their position, right? They are what they are. These other people, like Josh Wilcox, though, and some of these older looking white women standing out in front of Harvard waving their fists. I've seen them, in the past. And they wave their fists with Iraq too. They don't have, what are they about? Why are they out there suddenly becoming so passionate that they are supportive of Hamas? Now, I understand that somebody like Dr. E. Michael Jones, who is doing broadcasts right now that are blood curdling, and in terms of attacking the state of Israel, his motivation is religious. He embraces a strain of Christianity that has really been, kind of moved. The Christianity has moved from it. I mean, it's not really the mainstream any longer. And I don't know if it was ever something that was
I
accepted.
don't think so. I mean, I wonder what brand of Christianity would be in favor of it.
Well,
I think
I can tell you what his theory is, that because 2,000 years ago, the ancient Judeans did not accept Jesus as the Messiah, and that Jesus was a Jew, which is particularly aggravating to him. And that furthermore, the Sanhedrin probably recommended his execution to the Romans. They didn't believe he was God. They believed that he was a heretic, therefore, and that he was threatening to bring the Roman sword down upon Judea, which eventually happened anyways.
Yeah, well,
So they recommended his execution. But because of that, the Jewish people are condemned. I mean, that we're involved with rebelling against, and we're at war against God, and that we're at war against Logos, as he calls it, which is the order of society. And then he goes on to basically link Jews to every revolution that's occurred ever since, including some very good revolutions, like the American Revolution, like the Civil Rights Movement, like the Haitian Revolution. His book, what was it? The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, lists every enemy of the Catholic Church as being run by or part of a Jewish conspiracy, including the Cathars of France, the Hussites, Martin Luther, John Calvin. They're all Jews, so they're all part of this Jewish revolutionary spirit, as he calls it, which is a way.
John Calvin and Martin Luther were Jewish.
Well, he does. They don't have to be literally Jewish.
No, I know.
They're just part of this Jewish revolutionary spirit, which this is one of the themes of my new book, which is going to be coming out, called The Anti-Semitic Spirit, by which you don't even need Jews. You don't even need Judaism to blame the Jews. There were no Jews in Martin Luther's movement. Jan Hus was not a Jew. I mean, but somehow they could be called Judaizers. I mean, the Protestants called the Roman Catholic Church a Judaizing influence, and the Catholics called the Protestants Judaizers. Jews had very little to do with any of this, but somehow we were blamed. And, you have Judaism is blamed for the darker side of capitalism, namely usury. At the same time, Judaism is blamed for communism, which abolished usury and took over all credit by the state. 19th century, I'll give one more example. The Paris Commune. It was an attempt by a group of communists to take over France in 1871, and it was suppressed. The Jews were blamed by both sides. They were blamed for the Paris Commune, and they were blamed by the other side, for destroying the Paris Commune. So, it's kind of like you don't need actual Jews involved. Just the very existence of the Jew is proof that they're responsible for whatever it is that you don't like, whatever it is that is disrupting your society. Now, as far as to bring this to Hamas, and by the way, people like Dr. Michael Jones and some of these, very specific people who view Christianity in that way, they were modified by St. Augustine of Hippo. St. Augustine was living at the time of the collapse of Rome, and he there was a lot of genocidal talk at that time in the Christian church about Jews. There was a very serious consideration in terms of annihilating all the Jews. People like St. Athanasius, St. John Chrysostom, I could name others, and some of the quotes, really, really blood-curdling stuff. We have to get rid of the Jews. They're enemies of God. And Augustine said, we have to protect the Jews because they are the people of the book. They do believe in God. Their Old Testament, which we've embraced, is something that they continue to live by. And therefore, they should not be harmed. Their synagogue should not be disturbed. And they should be allowed to continue to worship. However, there's a major codicil to that in Augustine's work, which maybe helped Jews survive. I don't know. But he said, nevertheless, because they've refused to accept Jesus and because they were implicated in his execution, they cannot be allowed to hold public positions. They can't be allowed to have positions of influence. They have to be segregated into ghettos eventually. And they have to be punished in order to serve as an example of a people who are suffering because of their sin of not accepting Jesus as Christ. So while we were allowed to survive, we couldn't do anything in public. I mean, if Michael Jones had his way, and he's actually said this, I wouldn't be able to do this show right now because I can't speak out in public. I would have to be a second-class citizen. I'd have to be a dhimmi. I would have to be sort of like the way black people were in the days of Jim Crow. You'd be relegated to your lane, and you would not be allowed to participate in some of the more powerful elements of society in case you might pollute the world. Now, the Islamists, with Hamas, on the other hand, they didn't even have a St. Augustine. They believed some of the people who were murdering Jews at that concert and in our film, on film, not only yelling out Allah Akbar, but they were also yelling out Kaibar Yud. Now, what does Kaibar Yud mean? Kaibar is in the Quran, or it's in the Hadith. It was a Jewish neighborhood in Mecca in the days of Muhammad. They were allies with Muhammad. They helped Muhammad in the early period. They financed him. They were encouraging him. But at some point when he reached a certain level of power, he went to them and he said, you have to accept me as the prophet. You have to join my religion, in other words. And when they politely declined, and they did so, they were like quaking in their boots when they said, we're not going to do that. We like you, we respect you, but we want to continue as we are. Muhammad reacted by completely annihilating that community. And the Hadith gets into very gory details of how that was done. They were literally trotted out and tortured and then dismembered and thrown into a pit, each one of them. And they were utterly destroyed. And in fact, the entire Jewish community of Arabia was wiped out and in his day. And that Muhammad was, unlike the Christian movement, Islam was a militant movement. Christianity says that you are to accept Jesus through faith. And you are to, it's a voluntary thing. It has to come from your heart. But with Islam, it's on the sword. I mean, they want to conquer the world and make a one world order as a reflection of the one God in heaven. And then they decide whether or not you're going to live or die if you're not accepting of their faith. And with regard to the Jews, they view the Jews since Khaybar as their eternal enemy that has to be destroyed because they believe that the Jews are the enemies of Muhammad and therefore the enemies of God. And that is what's motivating not only Hamas to engage in the most despicable kinds of atrocities, but it's motivated the entire anti-Israel movement. They cannot accept the idea that there might be a sovereign Jewish state in their midst. And that contradicts, of course, elements of Islam that does recognize Israel on top of it, the more moderate elements that actually does view the Israelites as taking sovereignty in Jerusalem as a pretext toward the creation of the end times. By the way, so doesn't Christianity. So anyway, that's the religious element that led to this attack. And it's people like E. Michael Jones, even though he's not calling for the slaughter of Jews, he's calling for a return to what Augustine called sicut Judaeus, a condition where the Jew would be allowed to live. Nevertheless, underneath the surface of that is the same ideology, that we are the enemies of God, we are the enemies of man, because we didn't accept Christianity, we didn't accept Jesus. And it's particularly aggravating to Christians because, or at least people like Dr. Jones, because Jesus himself was a Jew and his ministry was to his fellow Jews.
Well, one of the problems with Augustine's philosophy, who otherwise is one of the greatest saints in the church, he was always guilty about the fact that he was a very late convert. Right. He was in his 30s, and he is very effusive in trying to get people to accept the church, and to that extent was kind of a man of his time. But more modern figures like Michael Jones attempting to repackage this stuff from the 4th century to any relevance now is kind of sketchy in my
Oh,
opinion.
I mean, what are they going to do in America? You know, I mean, this is. I have a feeling that he is not too crazy about the idea. In fact, I think I've heard him imply this of a separation of church and state. You know, he feels it's failed because the Jews have become too influential. They're corrupting everybody.
I think people get carried away. I mean, Christianity is supposed to be an evangelical faith, but not at the point of a sword. But the point I always make with people is that how has it helped you, Michael Jones? And you could be the greatest Catholic in the world, which he isn't. If so much of your emotion is negative, directed at hating somebody else, what's the point of all that? How does that help your salvation exactly?
And by the way, the Catholic Church, the Catholic Archdiocese of New York, has had a procession supporting Israel, and it's beautiful. It's on video; you can see it. It's the Great Way Pundit linked to it, and you see priests and nuns proceeding down the street and chanting in Latin, and then they had a Eucharistic service supporting Israel and condemning Hamas. So his views are not mainstream in Catholicism, and you know, his new book, which is the Holocaust Narrative, it comes a little close to denying the Holocaust. It doesn't do that. Instead, he's complaining about Jews using the Holocaust and the memory of the 6 million Jews to attack their enemies. And on that score, he's right. There are Jews who do that. It is terrible. You know, they'll say, "Oh, well, I had a family member die in the Holocaust," in order to justify something that has nothing to do with Judaism. I mean, they'll do it to win an argument about abortion or something. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's kind of power politics. It goes back to, I mean, the historic example is Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. They show like when Caesar was assassinated, people were like wrapping themselves in the flag of Caesar and like, oh, this atrocity, and I'm here because I loved Caesar and I want to carry on. You know what I mean? It's people, this is just politics, unfortunately. Every politician does it. I mean, they all get up and they talk about, you know, whatever adversarial situation they had to overcome to justify whatever it is they're pushing. Not good, and I'm not supportive of it. And it is a problem, especially with the ADL, frankly. You know, they'll push, you know, we are suffering from the Holocaust as they push, basically, neutering children or swinging open the border, or whatever it is they're pushing. So I agree with him on that. But that don't mean the Holocaust didn't happen. And by the way, E. Michael Jones, in case you're listening, I had family members who died or who were murdered by the Nazis in Nazi-occupied Europe. So there. Am I playing the Holocaust card? Not to push any agenda, but I'm also not going to back away from it. And if you don't like it, that's tough.
I think the appeal of the Palestinian movement to these idiot liberals like this Wilcox character
Yes.
is the old Marxist thing that I mentioned way at the beginning of the oppressor and the oppressed. And
Well,
of
it's
course,
critical theory. Yeah, it's just another example of critical theory, whether it be critical race theory, critical legal theory, critical whatever theory. Everything is put. I mean, in sociology they call it conflict theory,
yeah,
but it's Marxist, and it's the idea that everything has to be divided into two dialectical camps, one of which is dominating the other. It's the grand conspiracy theory of Marxism, that the people who are the haves are exploiting the people who are the have-nots as they define those terms, and that ultimately the people who are the haves get to define what is true, what is reality. Not that they don't influence it, but the bottom line is that there is ultimately objective reality. The Marxists don't recognize that. They think everything is manufactured. That we're living in a world where there's what they call, what are they the term for it? Social consciousness or something. Everything is made up as they go, and so they feel that they need to take the position of power, so they get to make it up, and they do make it up in many cases. But yeah,
what about the notion that Mossad deliberately let these attacks occur as a way of escalating the conflict once and for all?
oh, a really really ugly conspiracy theory. And by the way, speaking of Mossad, I've been listening to anti-Semitic people for years on the internet. I don't want to get into all the names, but they have all these conspiracy theories about the Mossad as controlling the world and being involved in sex trafficking and arms dealing and instigating wars. If the Mossad is so powerful, why the hell didn't they see what was happening here? Why did a couple of people on hang gliders come in and slaughter 1,000 Jews? Do you think that Israel wants that? That's not good news for Israel. This isn't this isn't something that anybody can celebrate. Now, if they think if the Jews are going to kill 1,000 of their own people so that they could go into Gaza, no, they could go into Gaza anyway. They could have dropped a Moby on Gaza yesterday if they wanted to. I mean, it's not. I don't think that. Now we're getting into the political question. If that were true, then why is it that Ariel Sharon, as prime minister, a very hawkish figure in Israel, why did he not only turn Gaza completely over to the Palestinian Authority and give it complete independence and sovereignty, no Israeli presence at all, but he ordered Jewish communities in Gaza to leave? Talking about maybe 30,000, 40,000 people. They were stripped out of Gaza. They were ethnically cleansed. It was made Judenrein, to use the Nazi expression. Many of them didn't want to go, and some of them were forced out by the Israeli army. Others left voluntarily. They left behind businesses, greenhouses, small manufacturing, shops of all sorts, which were all either turned over to the Palestinians, or in some cases they destroyed them. Maybe they should have, maybe they shouldn't. But the point is that they left in place an infrastructure. The Israeli government helped finance the training of Palestinian police and security people so they could maintain the basic functions of governance. Money was pouring in from all over the world, including from the United States taxpayer, to help build Gaza as the beginning of a Palestinian state. And there would have been a lot more. At the same time, people don't remember, Israel left Jericho on the West Bank to the same Palestinian Authority. And there was movements toward more. There was movements toward the creation of a sovereign Palestinian state that would have been the only thing the Israelis asked for was that they live peaceably alongside Israel. Nothing more. They weren't asking for them to even recognize Israel or to have any ambassador. They weren't asking for anything more than that they would coexist with Israel peaceably. Israel was tired of the war. They were tired of occupying their land. And so everything was moving in that direction. And Gaza could have been turned into Hong Kong. I mean, we're talking about beachfront property here, beautiful beaches. You even see the buildings in Gaza now. Gaza is not poor. People, the left wants to say, oh, they're poor people. No, there's a lot of wealth there. Money has poured in from the Gulf states, from Qatar in particular. And they had the opportunity to create this fantastic sovereign entity that would have been a responsible independent state to the degree that they were willing to make that happen and take responsibility. And I think most Gazans wanted that. I mean, I'm using a little anecdote here, but I lived and worked on a factory for a summer near Gaza. This was in 1989, I think, around that time. And the people that worked there were both Israelis and Arabs coming in from Gaza with the employees. They were making like spices and they were packing various foods. My cousin happened to be the foreman, so he brought me in to work there. And being the inquisitive American that I am, I tended to hang out with the Palestinians, not the Israelis, which annoyed my cousin and annoyed some of the Israelis, but so be it. And they were all friendly. I mean, they used to play practical jokes on each other, but mainly people kind of stuck to their own side.
Yeah.
But I got to know the Palestinians to an extent that you could as an outsider. And my impression, again, this is anecdotal, was that they admired Israel, that they wanted to be like Israel. You know, the culturally, they wanted to embrace the Israeli way of life. And they wanted peace with Israel, but at the same time, they wanted sovereignty for Gaza. And they did want Arab and Islamic or Arab and Palestinian sovereignty. And I agreed with that at the time. And I think most Israelis agreed with it too. But the problem was that once they did get that in Gaza, and that happened a few years after I had done this, within a year, Hamas, the radical religious movement, an Islamist movement, was able to take over. And they did so violently. I think they killed about 200 Palestinian Authority people. And they turned Gaza from what it could have been into basically nothing more than a launching pad against the state of Israel itself. They started firing thousands of missiles. They started building terror tunnels so they could sneak into Israel and slaughter Jews. They started to float over these gas balloons, which would ignite so they could burn Israeli fields and forests. They basically made war on Israel. So when I hear the liberal media talk about Gaza is occupied, that's wrong. It's not occupied. It probably will become occupied now because it is proven that they can't.
Yeah, well,
but
the media just has to reflect this left-wing point of view, which is always and forever going to use the Marxist theory. And it doesn't matter. Look at a guy like Larry Tribe. He came out in favor. He's Jewish, supposedly.
He's a nut. I mean, do you follow his Twitter? Oh my! I mean, he's embarrassing. I mean, talk about tin hat, anti-Trump and all this crap. I've texted him a few times through Twitter, and I've said, I mean, dear Mr. Law Professor, someone who was being considered for the Supreme Court by Obama, you're disgracing your college. I mean, he's bizarre, actually. Some of the garbage that he spews on Twitter. I mean, any respectable person would be embarrassed by some of this crap, some of these weird conspiracy theories. And he's one of the masterminds, by the way, behind trying to put Trump in jail. I mean, he also was a mastermind, just to give a little history. He came up with the idea during the Bush versus Gore contest in Florida, where they were trying to stop Bush, that there should be alternative electors, alternative delegates for Gore that could then be seated, right? Now, of course, that's a crime if Trump does it. Now you have the rotten attorney general in Michigan trying to get the names of people who contributed to the electors that she's prosecuting and she wants to put in jail. Talk about police state bully boy tactics.
I never understood under what theory that's a crime. I mean, if you're going to challenge an election, you should have at the ready alternative ones.
It's been done many times in American history. It was done during the Jefferson election. This is part of the Constitution. All of a sudden, because Trump's doing it, it's like everything else with Trump. Every time he goes to the bathroom, they got somebody there, they're going to charge him with a crime. I mean, listening and bugging his phones. And then if he says something, they're going to take it out and amplify it and say, charge him with more crimes and try to embarrass him. I mean, that's just what they do. And Lawrence Tribe is one of the main architects behind that whole rotten, way approach. I mean, Dershowitz, I think, I don't remember the legal word he used for this. I listened to his podcast. It's very good. He's I don't endorse him, but, he's a good teacher. He's a good professor. And he explained that this is an abuse of the American constitutional system and the American philosophy of law to use law in a way that would target certain people who you oppose politically, and to try to parse an interpretation out of law to use it in that way only for that purpose. This is actually, it's not illegal, but it runs against American jurisprudence and American legal philosophy. And that's what these people are doing. I suppose it's similar to lawfare. They're going to use our system to try to destroy their enemies politically rather than do it the old-fashioned, the legitimate way, which is debate them. Do it, throw mud, but do it, do it out in the open and have like a ribald debate and see which side wins. That's how the system really is supposed to work.
Well, leave it to the liberals to pervert the system. But the other thing that affects them is just that they're stupid and have no life experience. If you look at the New York case against Trump, they finally were able to depose a witness as a supposed victim, quote unquote, of Trump undervaluing or overvaluing his assets. So Letitia James, I guess, deposes this guy who's an executive with some big bank. And she asked him, well, why did you make the loan to Trump? Well, because we knew we'd pay it back. That was it. That failed. The other thing they're digging up is that a financial guy left the Trump organization and they made him sign a non-disclosure agreement.
So
now imagine how out of it you have to be to realize that signing an NDA is in almost 100% of the time you have a termination agreement with an employer. If you're in a certain position, you will sign an NDA.
Of course, people do it all the time. That's ridiculous. I signed one once.
If Trump, it's a crime.
Yeah, that's absurd. The whole rotten case is. Stalin, would be smiling from the grave over that case. They're trying to take away his license to do business. They're trying to liquidate his assets and his property and that of his children, that of anyone associated with him, anyone who's ever been seen with him. It's just awful. It's the worst of all the cases against him. It's so vile. And that she came out of that after Trump spoke. She was so triggered by that. And Trump spent the day there in the court, and he did speak about it. And he pointed out that she had said when she was running for attorney general that she was going to get Trump, and I'm going to find. She knew at the time, she knew nothing about Trump. She had no evidence for anything. It was just, this is why she was there. And she came out of that courtroom so triggered that she looked like she was about to explode. And she said Trump is playing the race card and that he's dangerous. He's going to cause violence. Just to show how pathetic this whole thing is.
What is her dog in the fight here?
She's a Trump hater. You scratch the surface. It's irrational. I think that she overestimated the number of Trump haters that were in New York. She figured it would get her elected, and maybe it did at the time. I don't know if it would today. And this is cult of Trump haters. They're willing to put a man in prison for 22 years who wasn't even in Washington on the day you had the protests because of his comments on Twitter. Right? I'm talking in this case about Enrique Tarrio. And others. These people did nothing. But you have juries in Washington, D.C. that are filled with these bizarre, demented, irrational Trump haters who don't give a damn about, the rule of law. They spit on the Constitution. They don't care about anything but this relentless idea of taking out Trump. And they don't know why. The people on the inside, of what Michael Glennon calls the double government, people like Brennan and Clapper, who are, by the way, back on television, they should be in prison. And these other former, intelligence people who still have security clearance, they do know why they have to take out Trump. They're fully conscious. They're fully witting. But these nincompoops, like people on the jury, people like certain members of my own family, everyone knows people like this, they have no idea what this is about. They're just goose-stepping along to this unprecedentedly coordinated propaganda campaign by the media. And to bring things back to Hamas, you have some of the same people protesting on college campuses. And I think that it's backfiring. I think that even these hardened leftists, and particularly the hardened Jewish leftists, most of them are disgusted by this, and they're seeing it. And I also, this is a point of criticism, I understand why many of my fellow Jews, including many of my fellow liberal Jews, are pretty upset by some of the enhancements of what's happened with the Hamas attack on that concert, and they're sending out atrocity pictures and photos. And so they're reacting by saying, oh, well, the Hamas are animals and they have to be annihilated. That's a mistake. They should not be saying that. They should not be thinking that. That's not the answer. That's not part of Jewish values. And that only feeds people like E. Michael Jones, who then uses that in his campaign to say, you see, Israel is doing. So I say to you, cut down on some of that kind of rhetoric. Maybe sit back a little bit and let the IDF do their job. Everyone in Israel, liberal and conservative, agrees that Hamas can no longer be governing Gaza at this point. So let's just be a little bit more circumspect. Let's let those kinds of emotions not overtake the situation, because that's what Hamas wants to have happen. And let's let the government of Israel, which is elected by the Israelis, do its job. And I think that they will do what they have to do.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. The trouble is that you pointed out, it's all an emotional reaction to these people.
And rightfully, but let's not let that happen. You can't react emotionally in a war. Look, I don't know why I think of this, but in World War I, the Kaiser in Germany and the German imperialist government would send out postcards of American soldiers who had been murdered, who had been killed in war, then dismembered. They were gruesome photos and they were upsetting, and they would be published in American newspapers. And one of those was a photo of Theodore Roosevelt's son, who was killed in battle. And it was very upsetting. And actually, Theodore Roosevelt never got over it. He died within a year of seeing that.
Right.
So this is what happens in war. It's atrocity propaganda. They're going to use that as a way to demoralize and upset the opponents. That doesn't mean they're not doing it. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't pay a price for that. They should, and they will. But you have to kind of, as difficult as it is, it's easy for me to sit here in Boston and say this. I don't have my son and daughter kidnapped right now and sitting in who knows where. I will say, by the way, I have 4 cousins in Israel who have been called up, and they are at Gaza now. So I have a little bit of concern, and I know them well. But, it's like, I get the fact that people are overly heated right now. I've heard reports from people that I know, someone that's very close to me right now, who lives in New York, who has gone to some of these rallies and who said the atmosphere is not healthy in Jewish circles. You have people talking about, Hamas as animals and that kind of language. It's not productive. Don't go there. That's playing their game. That's seeking to their level. We have to be bigger than that. We have to be true to our values, as difficult as it is. So,
if it has the advantage of red pilling some of these Jews, maybe the emotional reaction is helpful.
Let it be channeled in a way that carefully and very methodically dismantles this enemy so that they don't do it again. It's kind of like, I don't care, in the whole fight against Trump, I don't necessarily want to see Trump come in and throw, all of these scoundrels in prison. And I just want them out of public life. I want them out of harm's way. Let them go off and enjoy their ill-gotten gains somewhere else.
The trouble is that's not
But
what
let's not go to vengeance. Yeah.
because all these, especially Michael Hayden and Brennan, they're still around.
I know they are. Well, that's the problem. They need to be removed from public. I mean, these are criminals. In the case of Brennan and Clapper, I mean, they're the ones who made up the whole Biden laptop business, where they claimed that it was a Russian disinformation, and they signed a letter that was published, which led to the canceling of the New York Post. I met one of America's oldest newspapers who was reporting on the Hunter Biden laptop. That's campaign interference.
Right, but
they're the ones that. But yet, and they should be punished for that. They should at least lose their security clearance, and they shouldn't be looked to as any kind of experts on anything, given the fact they've been exposed as liars. And it bothers me that they are. But at the same time, just my feeling is they should just go away. I don't need to have vengeance on them.
Well,
I need them to be
like
exposed.
don't go away. That's the problem.
You're right. I mean, that is the problem. They'll never go away. We'll never be rid of them, certainly. But in the specific case, you're right. They won't. To hell with them. They'll suffer in the next life. I mean, I hope.
Well, I guess that's a good way to look at it. But I think there should at least be some public shaming of these individuals.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I had the extreme misfortune to not only meet John Brennan, I would see him virtually every day because he belonged to the same gym that I did.
John Brennan?
I talked to him on occasion.
Did you ever ask him why he voted for Gus Hall in the presidential election?
Our conversations never got quite that far.
I understand.
But he was a full-on communist.
Yeah.
He's also a Muslim. Great combination.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
And nothing happens to him. He gets picked up by these stupid TV networks. And I got to tell you, it was very pathetic seeing Johnny Greenblatt on MSNBC complaining about their coverage of the Israel-Hamas situation.
What was his beef?
Well, they're giving too much credibility to Hamas, and why did they see that these are terrorist actions and so on? As if he just got this big revelation that all these left-wing outfits are in favor of Hamas.
I'm glad that he's saying that. I mean, that's good. He's finally doing something right.
Took him long enough.
Well, yeah. I mean, he should have said it years ago, and he's nothing more than a Democratic Party hack. He worked for the Obama administration, and he's turned the ADL, not that they were ever good, they're not, but he's turned it into nothing more than an arm of the Democratic Party.
Well, okay, that's the follow-up question. You think after all this and all these bad Democrats who have been openly supporting Hamas, you think Greenblatt's going to change? You think he's going to get rid of
I think that Greenblatt is one of these types who is going to close ranks when Israel's attacked. Yes, at least for the time being. I remember when in the last Hamas war, I think it was 5 years ago, I happened to be in synagogue on the Sabbath with my family, and standing in the lobby with two of these guys who are known radical leftists, Jewish, radical leftist Jews, handing out flyers to get people involved in supporting Israel. These were almost anti-Israel guys, and I knew them. And I said, "Oh, this is nice. I'm glad you're taking the right side here." And they go, "Well, in times of war, we're all on the same side."
But just wait till the war's over.
Well, that's right. Once the war's over, they go back to status quo ante. So that's what I think Greenblatt's all about. I mean, this is a war. This is Israel. Its existence is threatened. If Israel loses, they all go down. Liberal, conservative, left and right. So they are consolidating. I mean, even Netanyahu has formed a coalition government, a national unity government, and he's invited the opposition in. That's what Israel does in wartime. In 1967, Levi Eshkol was the prime minister when Israel was attacked. He was to the left of anyone. I mean, he was an open socialist, but he invited Menachem Begin into his government and into the room to help him run things, who was the radical right winger in this day, because that's what happens. You're all on the same side. They all have children and grandchildren. They all want to see the country survive. They want to see the society continue. So everybody closes ranks and they come together and they work together. So that's what's going on.
We'll see how long it lasts.
It won't last, but it's going to last until it's no longer needed to last. And then they'll go back to squabbling and throwing mud at each other. Anyway, that's Israeli politics, and that's their business. I just hope they don't fall apart, you know?
Oh, no.
So, Mike, what do you have coming up on your Substack?
We just put up that thing about Israel Hamas, people when you get red pill. There's some interesting historical references there.
Excellent.
I had to go back to our old friend Franklin Roosevelt and the St. Louis and the sycophant rabbi Stephen S. Wise and so on.
Oh yeah, they wouldn't even mention anything about the Holocaust.
Yeah, well, that's not so well known.
You're absolutely right.
You know it because you're not a normie.
Right.
But here was this, it's bad enough. FDR and his wife were always anti-Semitic. Everybody knows that.
Exactly.
Now. But for Stephen Wise to hang out with these guys is a whole different level. So,
well, I mean, in his case, he was a radical socialist first, and plus, it gets into this issue of like currying favor with power. Something we talked about last time. It's too big a topic to get into now, but there is that strain within diaspora Judaism to curry favor with the prince and to do his bidding in exchange for protection. It always backfires on the Jews.
Well, it backfired for Judah Maccabee. Eventually,
well, Judah Maccabee kicked out the Greeks. I mean, although you're right in that he kicked out the Syrian Greeks. He reasserted Jewish sovereignty. He cleansed the temple. He created an independent commonwealth. But what was the first thing he did after cleansing the temple? He sent a gigantic tribute to Rome.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's right. So yeah, I mean, there is this, maybe you could call it realpolitik in that case, but in the worst case, it is trying to curry favor with the powers that be, to kissing up to Roosevelt or whoever, because you're going to hopefully get some kind of a modicum of protection. It comes out of a place of insecurity, which, look, we all have to be in the world, I suppose, but it should be balanced and it should be viewed in the context of what is a problem and what isn't, But anyway.
I mean, look at you. You could have been a contender.
I could have been, but I ain't.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mike. So I'll talk to you next week, and thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you soon. God bless everybody.
Sounds good.
And may Israel be safe, and God bless.